I remember the exact moment my marriage ended. It wasn't a dramatic fight, not really. It was quiet, almost a whisper, as the nurse bent over me in the intensive care unit, the sterile hum of the monitors filling the air around me. She mentioned my wife, Jessica, had called to check in. And in that instant, a strange, chilling calm settled over me. There was nothing. Just a cold, empty space where my feelings for her used to be, now replaced by the rhythmic beeping of machines. I was about to go into emergency surgery, fighting for my life, and that news felt like static. How did I get here? It all began innocently enough, with a dull ache in my back. For weeks, I'd dismissed it, attributing it to bad posture or a strenuous workout. But when it sharpened into a persistent throb, I finally made an appointment with my doctor in Columbus, Ohio. He ordered a scan, and that afternoon, sitting in his office, he pointed to an image on the screen, an 8mm white mass, sharp and jagged, lodged in my kidney. A kidney stone. Too large to pass naturally, already causing a blockage, threatening permanent damage if not removed immediately. He explained that my kidney function was dropping, and we needed to schedule surgery within days. The out-of-pocket cost would be steep, around $12,000, thanks to our high-deductible insurance. But as I drove home, a strange sense of gratitude washed over me. Jessica and I had been married for 6 years. 6 years of meticulous financial planning, building an emergency fund for exactly this kind of disaster. We'd sacrificed vacations, fancy dinners, all to sock away nearly $18,000. We were partners, always on the same page about money, splitting everything 50-50, talking through every major expense. This was what we saved for, right? I found Jessica at our kitchen table, her laptop open, surrounded by wedding magazines. Her sister, Chloe, was getting married in just 10 days, and I assumed Jessica was helping with last-minute plans. I sat down and calmly explained everything the doctor had said, the stone, the surgery, the urgency. She listened, nodded, asked about recovery time and pain management. I felt a wave of relief, a familiar comfort, knowing my partner would face this with me. Then I said it. So, we'll need to pull $12,000 from the emergency fund. That's exactly what we saved it for. I expected immediate agreement, maybe a squeeze of my hand. Instead, her face transformed. A flicker of panic, then a heavy cloak of guilt. My stomach dropped before she even spoke. She started talking fast, explaining that Chloe was having issues with wedding finances. The venue had increased its price, the caterer needed a bigger deposit, Mark's family had backed out. 3 weeks ago, Jessica said, Chloe had come to her in tears, desperate, facing the nightmare of canceling her dream wedding after invitations were sent and the dress bought. Jessica said she'd made a decision in that moment, a sisterly bond, to help. She transferred $14,000 to Chloe's account as a loan, due back in 6 months. I just sat there, processing. Her voice grew defensive. It wasn't a gift, she insisted, but a temporary loan. Chloe and Mark had signed a promissory note. She'd been planning to tell me, but the timing never felt right. Why? I asked her, my voice low, would you make a $14,000 decision without consulting me, when it was our shared money, our shared safety net? She looked at me, almost impatient. I knew you'd overthink it. You'd try to talk me out of it. The argument that followed lasted 3 agonizing hours, echoing through every room in our Columbus apartment. This wasn't about Chloe, I tried to explain, it was about unilateral financial decisions, about taking money specifically designated for emergencies like the one I was now facing. Jessica kept circling back, Chloe would pay us back, with interest. The wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. My surgery could wait 1 more week until she could find other funds. It's not like you're dying, she said, dismissively. It's just a kidney stone. People deal with those all the time. I told her the doctor said delay was dangerous, that I had a low-grade fever, a sign of infection. That kidney damage could be permanent. She rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. Everyone exaggerates medical issues. My Uncle Frank just drank a bunch of lemon water for his. I pulled out the medical papers, showing her where the urologist had written in capital letters, "Surgical intervention urgent," where he'd highlighted kidney function decline and risk of sepsis. She barely glanced at them. "Chloe's wedding is in 10 days. Asking you to postpone for 1 week won't kill you. You can wait. It's her special day." The finality in her voice, the way she made my health negotiable against a party, made something crack inside me. That night, I moved into the guest bedroom. Over the next 2 days, my condition worsened. The dull ache became sharp, stabbing pains that stole my breath. My fever climbed. I was stuck, needing surgery I couldn't afford because my wife had essentially taken our emergency fund. Yes, I started thinking of it as theft. Jessica noticed my decline but kept minimizing it, bringing me Tylenol, saying I'd feel better soon, reminding me every few hours about Chloe's rehearsal dinner, how she needed to focus on preparations. On the 3rd morning after my diagnosis, I woke up burning from the inside out. I stumbled to the bathroom. My urine was pink and cloudy. My temperature read 103.2 degrees Fahrenheit. I knew what this meant. The doctor had warned me: fever, urinary symptoms, blocked kidney infection, sepsis. It could kill you faster than you realized. I texted my brother, Michael, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, letting him know what was happening. Then I called an Uber to the emergency room. Jessica had already left to help Chloe with dress alterations. I didn't want to wait. The ER doctor took one look at my chart and the rapid test results. He started 4 antibiotics immediately. Early stage sepsis. Emergency surgery. Now. Not tomorrow. As soon as they could get an operating room ready. They admitted me directly to the ICU. I remember lying there, multiple intravenous lines in my arms, monitors beeping, nurses rushing. I texted Jessica. 3 hours later, she responded she'd come by after the rehearsal dinner. Chloe really needed her support. I was in good hands with the doctors. I didn't respond. I was being prepped for surgery. And I just realized something that should have been obvious days ago: my wife had chosen her sister's wedding over my life. She had let me deteriorate to the point of organ failure because she didn't want to admit she'd made a catastrophic financial decision. Flower arrangements and seating charts had somehow become more important than my kidney function. They wheeled me toward the operating room around 8 p.m. Jessica, I thought, was probably at some nice restaurant, toasting Chloe and Mark, while I went under anesthesia, not knowing if my kidney could be saved, or if the infection had spread too far. The last thing I heard was a nurse saying Jessica had called to check on me. And I felt nothing. Just that cold, empty space. While she got ready for a rehearsal dinner, picking out her outfit and curling her hair, I was in the ICU, fighting an infection that could have been prevented if she'd just been honest about the money 3 weeks earlier. I woke up 3 days later. Tubes came out of places I didn't know could have tubes. A pain in my side felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to my ribs. The nurse explained the operation took longer than expected because the infection had spread. They saved my kidney, but the damage was significant. I'd been unconscious for most of 72 hours, fighting sepsis. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. That phrase echoed. I'd been hours away from complete organ failure. When my eyes finally focused, I saw Michael, slumped in a chair beside my bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He'd driven 6 hours from Pittsburgh that first night after my text, camping out at the hospital ever since. Michael said Jessica had shown up once, on the second day, while I was still unconscious. She stayed maybe 20 minutes, mostly on her phone, texting about wedding details. He wanted to throw her out but didn't want to cause a scene. She'd left gas station flowers on the side table, the cheap wrapped bouquets they sell next to lottery tickets, and promised to come back soon. The hospital billing department came by. My total costs were around $18,000. Emergency surgery, ICU stay, out-of-network doctors, my out-of-pocket maximum was obliterated. I'd be paying this off for years. I kept thinking about the $18,000 we'd had in savings 3 weeks ago. That money could have covered the original planned surgery with room to spare. Instead, I was here, with permanent kidney damage and a massive medical bill, because my wife had decided her sister's party was more important. Jessica finally showed up later that day, wearing a new sundress, likely for a wedding event. She had this bright, fake smile that dissolved the second she saw my face. She tried to act concerned, asking about my pain, the hospital food. But her words had this distracted quality, like she was running through a script. Then she said the line that made me realize our marriage was completely over. "I'm so glad you're doing better, but did you really need to have the surgery right then? I mean, the wedding is in 3 days, and I've barely been able to help Chloe." She said it as if I'd deliberately chosen the most inconvenient time to nearly die, as if my sepsis was a scheduling conflict. We could have worked around it with better planning. I asked her if she understood I'd nearly died, that sepsis kills people, that doctors said another 6 hours and I might not have made it. Jessica waved her hand dismissively. Doctors always exaggerate to cover themselves legally. Obviously, you're fine since you're sitting here talking to me. She actually used the word inconvenient to describe my emergency surgery. Said the timing had been really inconvenient for everyone. That was the moment. I stopped seeing her as my wife. She was a stranger who happened to share my last name, someone whose priorities were so fundamentally different from mine that we might as well have been from different planets. After she left, I stared at the ceiling tiles, thinking about all the small moments over the past 6 years I'd ignored or explained away. Times she'd chosen her family over our marriage. Decisions made without consulting me. My concerns dismissed as overdramatic. I'd always told myself she was just close with her family, that her loyalty was admirable. Now, I saw it for what it truly was, a toxic codependency where her sister's wants would always trump my actual needs. That evening, from my hospital bed, using the phone they'd given me to order meals, I called Mr. Davies. He'd reviewed contracts for my job years ago, a straightforward, practical attorney. I explained the situation in clinical terms, the emergency fund withdrawal without consent, the delayed surgery, the sepsis, the wedding that was more important than my life. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something that crystallized everything. "What you're describing is financial infidelity, and courts take it very seriously, especially when one spouse's decisions directly harm the other." He said I had clear grounds for divorce, but the medical consequences made it even more clear-cut. Then he suggested something I hadn't considered, a civil claim against Chloe for conversion of funds, arguing she'd accepted money she knew wasn't freely given. The idea felt extreme, but also perfectly appropriate. I agreed to both actions. Mr. Davies said he'd draft the divorce papers immediately, we could do everything digitally, and he'd include medical bills and emergency fund documentation as evidence of harm. He'd also prepare a separate lawsuit against Chloe for the $14,000 plus interest and legal fees, arguing she knew the money wasn't given with full marital consent. 2 days later, still connected to an intravenous drip and heart monitor, I signed the divorce papers on an iPad, using my finger for a digital signature that felt surreal and final. Mr. Davies arranged for Jessica to be served that day. He also sent copies to the wedding venue with a legal notice about the disputed funds. I knew this would blow up the wedding, but I stopped caring about that somewhere around the time I'd been fighting for my life while my wife picked out an outfit for a rehearsal dinner. The venue called Chloe within an hour, telling her they were putting everything on hold until the legal dispute was resolved. They couldn't proceed with an event potentially funded by stolen money. Chloe called Jessica. Jessica called me. My phone started ringing while I worked on the breathing exercises my physical therapist had shown me. I let it go to voicemail 3 times before finally answering. Jessica's voice screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me every name she could think of, said I was destroying her family, vindictive, cruel. She'd never forgive me for ruining her sister's special day. I waited until she ran out of steam, her screaming turning to big, dramatic sobs, the kind she always used for sympathy. Then I said the only thing that mattered: you asked me to wait for my surgery so your sister could have her wedding. You let me get to the point where I almost died. And now you're upset that I'm not waiting to file for divorce? The line went quiet, save for her ragged breathing. Then she tried a different approach, her voice soft, pleading, begging me to hold off just one more week so Chloe could have her day, and then we could deal with our problems. I told her the wedding was cancelled and hung up mid-sentence. The nurses told me later that afternoon my vitals had improved significantly after that phone call. My blood pressure had dropped to normal levels for the first time since I'd been admitted. Ending my marriage, it seemed, was better for my health than staying in it ever had been. The wedding was officially cancelled that evening. I heard through Michael that Chloe's fiancé, Mark, had called everything off, not just the ceremony, but their entire relationship. He'd found out his bride-to-be accepted $14,000 from her sister without questioning if it was okay. Apparently, Mark asked Chloe point-blank if she knew the money came from our emergency fund without my permission. When she hesitated, he realized she'd had doubts but took it anyway. He told her anyone willing to take money from a sick person for a party wasn't someone he wanted to build a life with. He walked out of their apartment that same night. Jessica called 6 more times over the next 2 days. I ignored every call, finally blocking her number when her voicemails alternated between rage and desperate pleading. Her mother, Brenda, tried calling too, leaving a message about how I was tearing the family apart, how heartless I was toward Chloe, who'd done nothing wrong. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. I was done explaining myself to people who thought a wedding was more important than someone's life. The hospital discharged me after 8 days with a list of restrictions longer than my arm, wound care instructions, 3 different medications, and a follow-up appointment to assess the permanent damage to my kidney function. Michael drove me home to the Columbus apartment I'd shared with Jessica. She'd cleared out about half her stuff, leaving everything in chaos. Drawers hung open, closet doors ajar, as if she'd packed in a rage. There was a note on the kitchen counter: she was staying with Chloe, and I'd destroyed both their lives over money that would have been paid back anyway. I read it once, then threw it in the trash. The delusion required to write something like that was beyond anything I wanted to engage with. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in over a week. Despite the pain in my side and the emotional devastation of my imploded marriage, I felt more at peace than I had in months. The wedding was cancelled, and my marriage was over. But that was just the beginning of how everything fell apart. The divorce hearing happened exactly 11 weeks after I filed the papers, which felt both impossibly long and shockingly fast, depending on which moment I was living in. I spent those weeks recovering physically, while watching my marriage disintegrate legally. I went to physical therapy 3 times a week and met with Mr. Davies twice a week to prepare for court. My kidney function test showed I'd lost about 40% capacity on the damaged side, which the kidney specialist explained was permanent and would affect me for the rest of my life. Regular monitoring, dietary restrictions, careful use of medications and alcohol. All because Jessica had prioritized a party over my health. The lawsuit against Chloe was scheduled for the week after the divorce hearing. Mr. Davies explained we were pursuing it separately to avoid complicating the divorce proceedings, that keeping them distinct would actually strengthen both cases. Jessica had hired a lawyer who was apparently coaching her to play the victim. I'd heard through Michael that she planned to paint me as controlling and vindictive, someone who'd weaponized the legal system to punish her family. The morning of the divorce hearing, I put on the only suit that still fit after losing 15 pounds in the hospital. I met Mr. Davies outside the courthouse. He reviewed our strategy one final time. He said the judge had already reviewed all our documentation, medical records, emergency fund statements, the timeline of events, and our case was solid. The hearing itself felt surreal in its mundanity, just a series of questions and answers in a bland courtroom that smelled like old wood and disappointment. Jessica sat on the opposite side with her attorney, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, clearly styled to look sympathetic and wronged. Her lawyer tried to argue that the emergency fund was marital property she had equal right to access, that family loans were normal, and that my medical emergency had been unpredictable, so Jessica couldn't have known I'd need the money. Mr. Davies calmly dismantled each argument. He walked through the timeline, pointing out Jessica had taken the money 3 weeks before my diagnosis. She'd hidden the withdrawal. And, most importantly, she'd refused to return it even after learning I needed emergency surgery. He presented the text messages where I'd explained the medical urgency and Jessica had responded I was being dramatic, the voicemails where she'd said the wedding was more important, the hospital records showing I'd nearly died from a preventable complication. The judge was a woman in her 60s, taking notes with an unreadable expression. But when she finally spoke, her tone was ice cold. She said that while marital assets were normally divided equally, this case involved financial decisions that had directly endangered my health and life. Jessica's actions, she stated, constituted a breach of fiduciary duty to the marriage. The ruling came down harder than I'd expected. Jessica was responsible for 60% of my medical bills, about $11,000 in installments. No spousal support, despite her request. And she had to immediately repay $7,000 from her share of our remaining marital assets. Her lawyer tried to argue the penalties were excessive, but the judge cut her off, saying someone who chose a party over their spouse's life-saving surgery shouldn't expect the court's sympathy. Jessica's face went white. I watched her whisper something angry to her lawyer, but I felt nothing except the tired sense of relief that it was finally over. The lawsuit against Chloe the following week was shorter, but somehow more bitter, because Chloe actually showed up to defend herself. She sat in the courtroom with her mother, Brenda, who kept glaring at me as if I'd personally destroyed their family. Chloe's attorney argued she'd received the money as a gift, had no knowledge of my medical situation, and that family loans didn't require the same formal consent as business transactions. Mr. Davies presented a timeline showing Chloe's wedding planning had accelerated right when Jessica withdrew the money. Text messages between the sisters discussed how I'd probably be upset but would get over it. Most damaging was a voicemail Chloe had left Jessica 2 days before my surgery, asking if I'd really agreed to the loan because Mark was getting suspicious. That voicemail destroyed Chloe's entire defense. It proved she'd known there was a problem with the money's origin but had chosen to keep it anyway. The judge ruled Chloe had to repay the full $14,000 plus 18 months of interest. Since she couldn't pay it as a lump sum, her wages would be garnished at $400 per month until the debt was satisfied. Chloe started crying when she heard the payment plan. Her mother, Brenda, actually stood up and shouted that I was ruining a young woman's life over money, that I should be ashamed of myself for being so petty. The bailiff had to escort them out. I sat there feeling simultaneously vindicated and exhausted by the whole spectacle. In the weeks after both court cases, I learned through various sources how thoroughly everything had collapsed for Jessica and Chloe. The wedding was never rescheduled, of course. Mark got engaged to someone else within 10 months, someone he knew from work, who he'd grown close to after the breakup. Chloe had to take on 2 jobs to cover the garnishment payments and her share of the apartment she now shared with Jessica, since neither could afford to live alone after Chloe lost her event planning position when word got around about the lawsuit. Jessica was working at a call center, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room of their 1-bedroom apartment, paying off her portion of my medical bills in installments that would take her roughly 4.5 years to complete. Her mother, Brenda, stopped trying to contact me entirely, telling everyone who would listen that I'd destroyed her daughters over a medical issue that wasn't even that serious, conveniently forgetting the sepsis and organ damage. Michael told me Jessica had tried to reach out to some of our mutual friends to get them on her side, but most people had heard the full story by then and weren't interested in maintaining friendships with someone who'd let their spouse nearly die for a wedding. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I adopted a cat, an orange tabby from the shelter, who I named Kidney. It was a dark joke that made my therapist shake her head. The cat didn't care about my medical history or my failed marriage. He just wanted food and lap time. And there was something deeply healing about having a living thing in my apartment who needed me without any complicated emotional baggage. I was still dealing with the physical aftermath of everything. The reduced kidney function meant I got tired more easily and had to watch my protein intake. I had regular appointments to monitor for any further deterioration. The kidney specialist said I'd probably be fine for decades if I took care of myself, but that any future kidney problems would be more serious because I was already starting from a compromised position. The financial recovery took longer than the physical or emotional. Between the medical bills and legal fees, I'd spent close to $30,000 total. Even with Jessica's court-ordered payments, I was still paying off credit cards and payment plans. But I managed to put a down payment on a small house with my share of the divorce settlement. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every time I made a mortgage payment, I felt grateful that I'd gotten out before Jessica could make any more unilateral decisions with our money. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that moment in the hospital. Lying there with intravenous lines and surgical drains, while my wife complained about wedding logistics. I'd feel this strange mixture of grief and relief. I'd lost my marriage, my health, and a significant chunk of my savings. But I'd gained something more valuable, the absolute certainty that I'd never again let someone make me feel like my life was negotiable. People asked me sometimes if I regretted filing for divorce from a hospital bed, if I thought I'd been too harsh or moved too fast. My answer was always the same. When someone asks you to postpone life-saving surgery for their sister's party, you don't wait to file for divorce. You just save yourself the time. How do you find the courage to rebuild your life when the person you trusted most betrayed you so profoundly?